Hello everyone, Grandpa Ron here again. Hope you're all having a great day. Today we're getting back into our very basic Bible study looking at the book of Joshua. And we've come now to chapter 21. The distribution of cities for the Levites. Up until this point we've seen the promised land divided between the different tribes of the children of Israel. But the Levites were not given a huge section of property in the promised land. But they are going to be given cities distributed around the promised land. Now remember, Jacob had talked about his sons back in Genesis chapter 49. And because the tribes of Levi and Simeon had done that dastardly act, remember, they had wiped out the people of Shechem unnecessarily because they had raped one of their sisters. It was a terrible thing. And Jacob said, no, you're not going to get property. You're going to be dispersed among your brothers. So remember, Simeon was given property kind of dispersed within some of the property of Judah. Their property was actually within the property dispersed to Judah. And now the Levites are going to be scattered all through these different tribes. They're going to be given cities. That's because they're going to be preserved because of something else that happened. Just remember when Moses came down off the mountain after having received the word of God, the children of Israel had made a golden calf, remember? And it enraged Moses and he smashed it. And he said, anybody that's for me, come to me, stand up. And the Levites were the only tribe that stood by him. And because of that, they basically were designated as the priests and the religious leaders for the nation of Israel. So we had these two events that contributed all the way up to now. One, they stood by Moses, so they kept a name for themselves. But because of what they did to Shechem, they're going to be dispersed among all the other tribes. But because they're to be the spiritual leaders within Israel, one of their duties is to teach and train and preserve the Word of God through teaching and admonition to these different tribes. And so scattering them out throughout Israel makes a lot of sense. One commentator has said that no Israelite lived more than 10 miles away from one of these designated cities. So there was always somebody available to help them with spiritual issues. So let's see how this distribution goes. I know I didn't explain that super well, but you get the idea. Chapter 21, verse 1. Then the heads of the households of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of households of the tribes of the sons of Israel. So they're coming forward to claim what God's promised to them. And they spoke to them at Shiloh in the land of Canaan, saying, the Lord commanded through Moses to give us cities to live in, with their pasture lands for our cattle. So the sons of Israel gave the Levites from their inheritance these cities with their pasture lands according to the command of the Lord. So now all the other tribes have their lands given to them, and now they're going to give to the Levites out of what's been given to them. Now verse 4, all the way down through verse 42, describes all these cities. There's 48 cities altogether, and 6 of them are the sanctuary cities, or the cities of refuge that we talked about in the last session. But they've got these 48 cities. Now let's skip down to verse 43 and see what it says. So the Lord gave Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. So the promised land has now been given to the children of Israel. Now, it all hasn't been totally conquered, and I think it's in Deuteronomy. It explains that some of this will take time. It'll be little by little. They will gradually take over and occupy all of this territory, all the lands that's been given to them. Now, all of the major military obstacles have been eliminated. But people living in the countryside in some of these cities, some of these small towns, have not yet been driven out, but that's going to occur. Verse 44, and the Lord gave them rest on every side according to all that he had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hands. So God has been faithful to his word. He's delivered all of these enemies into their hands. Some of them are still living in these areas, but God's saying, this is yours now, and you're going to be able to move them out. And in Deuteronomy, it also talks about how as they move into these areas, they're to burn their idols and burn their images and destroy their temples and not tolerate anything like that. So they're to slowly move in and take over. Verse 45, not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. So now they have relative peace. They still have to occupy the land, what's remaining of it. But everything's been divided, everything's been designated. The Levites know their role. Some commentators have criticized the Levites, saying they didn't live up to their role because the children of Israel, over time, because they, remember we talked about in earlier chapters, they didn't totally drive out the people like they were supposed to. So in future times, there were intermarriages. They adopted some of the ways of these enemy tribes. They began to worship images and idols. And while the Levites' failure probably had a lot to do with that, they weren't training up the people correctly and probably had sin themselves. All the blame can't be on them. We see today righteous parents that try to bring up their children correctly, but remember, we all have a sin nature. We all have to make a decision. And even the children of righteous parents, godly parents, can make wrong decisions and bad decisions. And I think that's what occurs here. Some of the blame falls on the Levites, but a lot of it falls on the Israelites themselves because they are the ones that give in to idol worship and false worship of false gods. Also, while they have occupied all the promised land now, this isn't an ultimate fulfillment of God's promise, because we're going to see in other books later on, in Judges and Kings and Chronicles, that they are driven out. They're displaced from their land later on. And so there's another movement into the promised land far into the future, even our future. It hasn't occurred yet. It'll only occur when Christ returns the second time as king. But for now, the initial promises have been met. God has lived up to his word. And again, as I said, Israel always has not, but God has. Any failures that the Israelites have experienced have been because of their failure to worship God as we're supposed to. Anyway, we're going to stop there. It's been relatively short, but this gives you an idea of the scope of the division of the land. And now all that has been taken care of, but we'll stop for now. Well, I hope this has been meaningful to you. and I hope you watch the next videos. In the meantime, God bless. Bye-bye.